The room was heavy with the scent of expensive floor wax and old, cold prestige. In the center of the mahogany table sat a leather-bound folder, the final word of Arthur Sterling. My grandfather wasn't just a man, he was an institution. He had built a shipping empire that touched every corner of the globe, a legacy forged in iron and absolute, unwavering silence. People didn't just respect Arthur, they feared the stillness he carried with him. And now, that stillness had finally claimed him. I sat at the very edge of the group, my chair pushed back just far enough to be forgotten. To my left, my father, Julian, adjusted his silk tie for the 10th time. He smelled of scotch and desperation, though he masked it under a layer of tailored arrogance. Next to him was my brother, Marcus, who was already scrolling through his phone, likely looking at high-end real estate or sports cars he hadn't yet paid for. They were lions waiting for the kill, their eyes fixed on the lawyer, Silas Thorne. Silas was as gray and stiff as the documents he held. He didn't look at us with sympathy. He looked at us like a ledger that needed to be balanced. He cleared his throat, and the room went dead silent. To Julian Sterling, Silas began, his voice a dry rasp. The estate bequeaths the primary residence in the Hamptons and a sum of $12 million, held in a managed account. My father didn't cry, he didn't even sigh. He simply nodded, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. It was the look of a man who had finally been rewarded for a lifetime of waiting for his father to die. To Marcus Sterling, Silas continued, the sum of $8 million and the controlling interest in Sterling Logistics. Marcus let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. He leaned back, his boots scuffing the expensive rug, the picture of a prince who had finally inherited his crown. He didn't look at me. He never did. In this family, if you weren't a source of power, you were an invisible ghost. Then, Silas stopped. He reached into a small, velvet-lined box and pulled out a single, crumpled envelope. He looked at me for the first time that morning. His eyes were unreadable, perhaps even a little pitying. And to Alara Sterling, he said, his voice dropping an octave, the sum of $10. Cash. The silence that followed wasn't like the silence of my grandfather. It was a jagged, ugly thing. Marcus was the first to break it. His laughter was loud, mocking, and cruel. It filled the room, bouncing off the portraits of our ancestors who looked down at me with equal disdain. My father didn't laugh, but he did something worse. He looked at me with a satisfied, thin-lipped smirk. It was the look of a man whose low opinion of his daughter had finally been validated by the highest authority. $10. Marcus gasped between laughs. I guess, even in the grave, the old man knew who was worth the investment and who was just background noise. I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I didn't even look away. I stood up, walked to the table, and took the envelope. Inside were 2 $5 bills. They were crisp, unusually clean, and felt strangely heavy in my palm. I tucked them into my pocket and walked out of the room. I could hear them talking as the door closed, discussing renovations, vacations, and the unfortunate but predictable outcome for the quiet girl who had spent the last 3 years of her life sitting by a dying man's bed for nothing. But they didn't know Arthur Sterling the way I did. To the world, he was a billionaire. To them, he was a bank. To me, he was the man who taught me that the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest, and that the most valuable things are always hidden in plain sight. I went home to my small, cramped apartment. I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out the 2 bills. I smoothed them out, my heart racing for a reason I couldn't quite explain. I remembered a rainy Tuesday, months ago, when my grandfather had gripped my hand, his voice a mere ghost of its former strength. Alara, he had whispered, most people look at the world, but they never truly see it. They see the surface, they see the gold. But the truth is always tucked away where the greedy won't bother to look. I took a small magnifying glass I used for my archival work and leaned over the bills. At first there was nothing, just the familiar green ink and the stern faces of the past. But then, as I tilted the first bill toward the light of my desk lamp, I saw it, a tiny, microscopic pinprick near the serial number. It wasn't a flaw in the paper, it was a mark. On the second bill, there was another, and beneath the numbers, written in a hand so small it was almost invisible, were 4 digits. A coordinate, a code. My mind raced. I grabbed a pen and a notepad. my fingers trembling. My grandfather was a man of puzzles. He hated the obvious. He loved the layers. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours cross-referencing those digits with everything I knew about his life. It wasn't a bank account. It wasn't a safe. It was a location. A small, forgotten plot of land on the edge of the city. An old shipyard that had been decommissioned decades ago. It was the place where he had started. The place he had told me stories about, of cold mornings, rusted metal, and the smell of the salt air. The next morning, the city was draped in a thick, gray fog. I drove out to the docks, the engine of my old car rattling as I navigated the potholed roads of the industrial district. The shipyard was a skeleton of its former self. Rusted cranes reached into the sky like the arms of ghosts. I climbed out of the car, the wind whipping my hair across my face. I followed the coordinates to a small, unremarkable brick building that looked like it had been abandoned since the 50s. The door was heavy iron, rusted shut. But when I looked at the lock, I didn't see a keyhole. I saw a digital keypad, modern and sleek, hidden behind a sliding metal plate. I entered the digits from the bills. The click that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The door groaned open, revealing a flight of stairs leading down into the dark. I pulled a flashlight from my bag and descended. My heart was a drum in my chest, echoing off the damp walls. At the bottom of the stairs was a room. It wasn't filled with gold bars or stacks of cash. It was a library. Hundreds of leather-bound journals lined the walls. In the center of the room was a simple wooden desk, and on that desk sat a single, silver key and a letter with my name on it. I opened the letter, my breath hitching in my throat. My dearest Alara, if you are reading this, it means you chose to look closer. It means you didn't let their laughter diminish you. And you didn't let the smallness of the gift blind you to its purpose. Your father and brothers seek wealth because they believe it will give them power. They do not understand that true power is the ability to see what others ignore. This room contains the real sterling legacy. These journals are the records of every deal, every secret, and every debt owed to this family for the last 50 years. This is the leverage. This is the truth. But more importantly, the key on this desk opens a private vault at the Mercantile Bank. Inside, you will find $45 million in liquid assets, completely separate from the public will. It is yours. All of it. I left them the scraps, the houses they will fight over, the business they will ruin with their ego. I left you the foundation. Do not be like them, Elara. Do not use this to be loud. Use it to be unstoppable. Build something that matters. And never, ever let them see you coming. With all my love and faith, Arthur. I stood there in the silence, the weight of the silver key cold in my hand. For years, I had been the quiet one, the one they talked over at dinner, the one they dismissed as soft. I realized then that my grandfather hadn't just left me money, he had left me a weapon. I didn't go to the bank that day. Instead, I went back to the shipyard and began to read. I read about my father's offshore accounts that he had hidden from my grandfather. I read about Marcus's reckless gambling debts that were being covered by company funds. I read about the bribes, the shortcuts, and the rot that lay beneath the sterling name. As I read, the girl who was too sweet and too easy began to fade away. In her place, something sharper was beginning to form. A week later, I received a call. It was my father. His voice was no longer arrogant. It was strained, bordering on panicked. "Alara," he said, trying to sound paternal. We've run into a bit of a legal snag with the estate taxes. Marcus made some clerical errors with the logistics firm. We were wondering if you still had that $10. It's a joke, of course, but we're looking to consolidate some family assets. We thought maybe we could talk about your future." I sat in my new office, a space they didn't know existed, overlooking the harbor. In front of me were the documents that could dismantle my father's reputation and put my brother in a courtroom for a decade. "I'm busy, Dad," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a deep sea. "Busy," he scoffed, a hint of his old temper flaring. "Doing what? You don't have a job, Alara. You have nothing." "I have exactly what Grandpa left me," I replied. "And you were right. It's more than enough." I hung up before he could respond. The next few months were a masterclass in calculated precision. I didn't announce my wealth. I didn't buy a mansion or a fleet of cars. I bought information. I bought the debts that Marcus owed to dangerous men. I bought the shares of the logistics firm that my father was forced to liquidate to cover his legal fees. I was a shadow in their lives, moving pieces they couldn't see. When Marcus lost his position at the company, he thought it was bad luck. When my father was forced to sell the Hamptons house to pay off a sudden, aggressive audit, he thought it was a vengeful government. They never suspected the quiet girl they had mocked. One evening, I visited the old estate. It was being cleared out, the furniture covered in white sheets like a house full of ghosts. I found my father sitting in the library, a glass of cheap whiskey in his hand. The room was empty of its prestige. He looked older, smaller. "I don't understand it," he muttered, not even looking up as I entered. He was a billionaire, and within a year it's all gone. The empire is dust. "The empire isn't dust, Dad," I said, standing in the doorway. "It just changed hands." He looked at me then, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" I pulled a small silver key from my pocket and set it on the table between us. Beside it, I placed the 2 $5 bills, now framed in a small, elegant display. "Grandpa told me that money doesn't show who people are," I said, echoing the words from that hospital room. "It just removes the mask. I saw your mask the day of the will reading. I saw Marcus's, too." My father stared at the bills, then at the key. The realization began to dawn on him, a slow, painful crawl across his face. He gave it to you? All of it?" "He gave me the chance to prove I was different from you," I said. "And I did. I own the logistics firm now. I own the debt on this house. I own the Sterling name." He stood up, his face turning a dark, ugly purple. "You little thief! That was my inheritance! I'll sue you! I'll take everything!" "With what money?" I asked quietly. "You're bankrupt, Dad. And Marcus is looking at 3 to 5 for embezzlement. I have the records. Grandpa kept them all." He collapsed back into his chair, the fire leaving him as quickly as it had come. He looked at me with something that might have been fear, or perhaps, for the first time in his life, respect. But it was too late for respect to matter. "What are you going to do?" he whispered. "I'm going to do what you never could," I said. "I'm going to build something that isn't based on fear or greed. And I'm going to do it quietly." I walked out of that house and didn't look back. The air outside was crisp and clear. I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of being invisible had been replaced by the power of being truly seen, by the only person whose opinion had ever mattered. Time has a way of smoothing out the jagged edges of the past. 2 years later, I sat in a nursery I had designed myself. It wasn't in a mansion, it was in a beautiful, sun-drenched house by the sea. In my arms was my daughter, Maya. She was tiny, a bundle of potential and soft breaths. I looked at her, and I thought about the legacy I would leave. It wouldn't be a test. It wouldn't be a game of shadows. I would teach her to be loud when she needed to be, but to value the silence. I would teach her that wealth is a tool, not a personality. My mother had reached out a few times, her letters filled with apologies and requests for loans. To help Marcus with his legal fees. I sent enough to keep them fed and housed, but no more. I wasn't being cruel, I was being careful. Love that depends on a paycheck isn't love, it's a transaction. And I was done with transactions. As the sun began to set over the ocean, casting long, golden shadows across the floor, I thought about that $10. It was the best gift I had ever received, not for the millions it led to, but for the clarity it provided. It had stripped away the lies of my family and left me with the only thing that truly mattered, the freedom to be myself. I leaned down and whispered into Maya's ear, the same way my grandfather had once whispered to me. "The world is full of noise, little one, but don't be afraid of the quiet. That's where the truth lies, and as long as you can see the truth, you will never be lost." I stood up and walked to the window, watching the waves crash against the shore. The Sterling name was no longer a symbol of cold, distant power. In my hands it had become something else, something human. I looked at the framed $5 bills on my desk, catching the light one last time before the sun dipped below the horizon. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice in the wind, a soft, satisfied murmur. "Well done, Alara." I closed the curtains and turned toward the warmth of the room. The story of the Sterling Empire wasn't over. It was just finally being written by someone who knew the value of the ink. The following months brought a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. I spent my days working with a small, dedicated team to turn the sterling logistics firm into a leader in sustainable shipping. We weren't the biggest anymore, but we were the best. We treated people with dignity. We paid fair wages. We did things the right way. I stayed out of the tabloids. I didn't attend the gala openings or the high society auctions. I preferred the company of my daughter, the smell of the ocean, and the steady, rhythmic work of building a life that felt real. Marcus eventually took a plea deal. He spent a year in a minimum security facility, and when he came out, he was a changed man, not necessarily better, but certainly quieter. He moved to a small town out west and started working construction. We don't talk, but I hear from my mother that he doesn't laugh as much as he used to. Sometimes, the truth is a heavy thing to carry. My father stayed in the city, living in a modest apartment I provided for him. He spends his days at a local park, telling anyone who will listen about the empire he used to run. Most people think he's just a confused old man with a vivid imagination. In a way, they're right. Every year, on the anniversary of the will reading, I take a day for myself. I go back to that old shipyard, which I've since converted into a community center and a maritime museum. I sit in the library in the basement, surrounded by my grandfather's journals, and I write. I write about Maya. I write about the business. I write about the lessons I'm still learning. I realized that my grandfather's greatest gift wasn't the money, or the secrets, or even the power. It was the realization that we are not defined by what people think of us. We are defined by what we do when no one is watching. I was the invisible girl, the quiet daughter, the one who didn't matter. And in that invisibility, I found the perspective to see the world for what it truly was. As I walked out of the museum and into the cool evening air, I saw a young girl standing by the water. She was quiet, watching the ships go by with an intensity that reminded me of myself. I walked over to her and handed her a small, silver coin, a token from the museum. "Always look closer," I told her with a smile. She looked at the coin, then back at me, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Why?" "Because," I said, "the most important things in life are usually the ones people are too busy to notice." She nodded, tucking the coin into her pocket with a look of determination. I watched her walk away, knowing that she, too, would eventually find her own truth. I drove home, the city lights reflecting off the water like 1,000 diamonds. I wasn't just Ellara Sterling anymore. I was a mother, a leader, and a woman who knew her own worth. I didn't need $1 billion to tell me who I was. But I was grateful for the $10 that had shown me who everyone else was. When I got home, Maya was waiting for me at the door, her face lighting up with a joy that money could never buy. I picked her up and held her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against mine. "I'm home," I whispered, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what that meant. It wasn't a house. It wasn't an estate. It was the feeling of being exactly where you were meant to be, with the people you were meant to love, and the peace of knowing that you had finally claimed your own life. The legacy of Arthur Sterling lived on, but it was no longer a burden. It was a foundation, and upon that foundation, I was building a world that was loud with laughter, bright with hope, and, above all, anchored in the truth. As I tucked Maya into bed, I noticed a small, folded piece of paper on her nightstand. It was a drawing she had made, a picture of a big ship, a small house, and 2 people holding hands. Beneath it, in her messy, beautiful handwriting, she had written one word: family. I smiled, a single tear of gratitude escaping. My grandfather had been right. Money doesn't change people. It just removes the mask. And once the masks are gone, all that's left is what you've built in the quiet. I walked out of her room and into the hallway, the house silent and warm. I looked at the display on my desk one last time. The 2 $5 bills. They were just paper. But to me, they were the map that led me home. And as I turned off the light, I realized that the greatest inheritance isn't something you receive. It's something you become. I became the woman my grandfather knew I could be. I became the mother my daughter deserved. And I became the master of my own destiny, one quiet, deliberate step at a time. The story of the $10 inheritance didn't end with a bank vault. It ended with a life well lived. And that, I realized, was the most valuable thing of all. As the years stretched on, the name Sterling began to mean something new in the city. It wasn't just a name associated with cold boardrooms and ruthless acquisitions. It became synonymous with the Sterling Foundation, an organization I founded to support young women from neglected backgrounds, the ones the world often looked past. We provided scholarships, mentorship, and legal aid. But more than that, we provided a space where being quiet was seen as a strength, not a weakness. I remember one girl in particular, a bright-eyed teenager named Sarah. She reminded me so much of myself at that age, brilliant, observant, but constantly talked over by her louder, more aggressive peers. When she was awarded our top scholarship, she came to my office to thank me. She sat in the same chair my father had once occupied, but she looked at the room with wonder, not entitlement. "How did you do it?" she asked softly. "How did you build all of this when everyone expected so little?" I smiled and reached into my desk drawer, pulling out a replica of those two $5 bills I had kept as a reminder. "I learned to look for the marks," I told her. "I learned that when the world tries to tell you you're worth nothing, it's usually because they're afraid of how much you actually know. Don't let them set your price, Sarah. Only you know the value of what you carry." She took the advice to heart. Seeing her thrive was a better return on investment than any stock I had ever purchased. My own daughter, Maya, grew up in the light of that philosophy. She was a force of nature, kind, sharp, and fiercely independent. She didn't care for the trappings of wealth, but she understood its responsibility. On her 18th birthday, I didn't give her a sports car or a trust fund. I took her to the old shipyard, to the basement library that still held my grandfather's journals. "This is your history," I told her, handing her the silver key that had once unlocked my future. "It's a record of where we came from, the good and the bad. Use it to understand the world, but don't let it dictate your path. Your legacy isn't what I leave you, it's what you leave for others." She looked at the journals, her eyes reflecting the same curiosity I had felt all those years ago. She didn't ask about the money. She asked about the stories. "Tell me about Grandpa Arthur," she said. And so, we sat in the quiet of that basement for hours, and I told her everything. I told her about the man who drank his coffee black and loved the silence. I told her about the will reading and the laughter of her uncles. I told her about the moment I realized that a $10 bill could be a map to a new life. As we walked out into the night, the moon reflecting off the harbor, I felt a profound sense of closure. The cycle of greed and silence had been broken. In its place was a lineage of strength and clarity. My father passed away peacefully a few years later. In his final days, he had stopped talking about the empire. He spent his time gardening in the small plot behind his apartment, finding a strange, late life peace in the dirt and the sun. He never apologized, not in words, but he did leave me a small wooden box. Inside was a single, faded photograph of him as a young boy, standing next to Arthur on the deck of a ship. On the back, he had written, "I'm sorry I forgot how to see." It was enough. Marcus remained out west. He eventually started a small woodworking business. He sends a card every year at Christmas. Never a long message, just a simple, "Thinking of you." It's a quiet connection, but it's an honest one. Looking back, I realize that my grandfather's deliberate gift was the ultimate act of love. He knew that if he had left me the millions outright, my family would have devoured me. They would have used guilt, litigation, and manipulation to strip me of everything. By making the gift look like an insult, he gave me the cover I needed to grow strong. He gave me the time to find my own voice. He didn't just give me an inheritance, he gave me a shield. Today, I sit on the porch of my home, watching the waves. The air is salty and sweet, and the house is filled with the sounds of a life well lived. Maya is off at university, studying environmental law, and I am content. The two $5 bills still sit in their frame on my desk. They are a reminder of where I started and the man who believed in me when no one else did. They are a symbol of the fact that the greatest treasures aren't the ones you can count, but the ones that count for something. I am Alara Sterling. I was the quiet girl who was worth $10, and I wouldn't change a single second of the journey it took to become the woman I am today. The sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The silence of the evening is no longer heavy or cold. It is a warm, familiar friend. It is the sound of a story that ended exactly the way it was supposed to. I close my eyes and breathe in the salt air, a small smile playing on my lips. I hear it, Grandpa, I think to myself, the quiet. And you were right. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. The legacy isn't the gold, it's the sight. It's the ability to see the value in the small, the beauty in the overlooked, and the power in the unspoken. I have lived my life by those marks, and I have found a fortune that no bank could ever hold. And that, finally, is the truth. As I go inside to start my evening, I notice a small envelope on the hallway table. It's from Sarah, the girl I mentored years ago. She's just opened her own legal clinic for the underserved. Inside the envelope is a simple note. I looked closer. Thank you for showing me how. I set the note down next to the photograph of Arthur. The ripples of his quiet life are still moving, touching lives he never met, through a granddaughter he never gave up on. Wealth fades, empires crumble, but the truth lasts forever. And it all started with $10 and a grandfather who knew that silence speaks louder than words. The light in the hallway flickers for a second, then steadies. I walk into the kitchen, the house filled with the scent of home. My life is full, my heart is at peace, and the silence is exactly as it should be, safe, strong, and mine. I often think about that final day in the hospital, the way the light hit the linoleum floor and the rhythmic hum of the monitors. It felt like a countdown then, a slow fading of a great light. But now I see it was an invitation, a door opening that only I was meant to walk through. My grandfather didn't want me to be like him, a titan of industry, isolated by his own success. He wanted me to be better. He wanted me to have the resources to change things, but the heart to stay connected to the ground. He wanted me to understand that the real measure of a person isn't what they take from the world, but what they protect within it. I've spent my life protecting the quiet. I've protected the voices that were drowned out. I've protected the truths that were too inconvenient for the loud and the greedy. And in doing so, I've discovered the greatest secret of all. You don't need $1 billion to change the world. You just need to be the one person who refuses to look away. I sit at my desk and pick up my pen. There are more stories to record, more journals to fill. Maya will read them one day, and she will know that her mother wasn't just a billionaire or a philanthropist. She was a woman who saw the world, even when it tried to make her invisible. She will know that she comes from a line of people who understood the power of a $10 bill. I start to write, the ink flowing smoothly across the page. The words are clear and steady, just like the life I've built. To my daughter, Maya, let me tell you about the value of looking closer. The house is still, the night is deep, and the story goes on one quiet word at a time. The Sterling name is no longer a burden of the past, it is a promise for the future, a promise that no matter how loud the world gets, there will always be a place for the truth, and that place is right here, in the heart of the quiet, in the strength of the unseen. I am Alara, and this is my legacy. It is a legacy of sight, a legacy of courage, and a legacy of love that never needed a mask to be real. I set the pen down and look out at the dark ocean. The waves continue their eternal rhythm, pulling and pushing, a constant reminder that life is a series of arrivals and departures. My grandfather departed, but he never truly left. He is in every choice I make, every word I write, and every quiet moment I cherish. He is the $10 in my pocket and the 45 million in the bank. But more than that, he is the reason I can look in the mirror and see a woman who is whole. I am not the ghost of the Sterling family. I am its heartbeat, and as I finally turn out the lamp and head to bed, I know that tomorrow will bring new challenges, new noise, and new masks. But I won't be afraid, because I know how to look closer. I know how to find the marks, and I know that as long as I have the truth, I have everything. The story of the Sterling Empire didn't end with a whimper or a bang. It ended with a breath, a slow, steady breath of a woman who finally found her way home. And in the end, that was all Arthur Sterling ever wanted from me. Good night, Grandpa, and thank you for everything. For the money, yes, but mostly for the $10 that saved my life. The stars above the harbor are bright and cold, watching over the city like the eyes of 1,000 ancestors. I sleep soundly, knowing that the legacy is safe. Not in a vault, not in a bank, but in the heart of a daughter who knows her own name. The quiet is beautiful, the truth is enough, and the morning is only a few hours away.